I'm Franklin. In 1989, Medellin wasn't the city of eternal spring. In August 1989, Medellin wasn't just a city. It was a beautiful, terrified hostage. They called it the City of Eternal Spring because of the flowers. But by the time the cartels turned it into their fortress, the only things blooming were paranoia and funeral wreaths. The Abarra Valley is a deep bowl surrounded by towering green peaks. It traps everything inside: the smog from the diesel trucks, the smell of frying plantains, the heavy humidity, and the sound of gunfire that echoes off the mountainsides like thunder that never fades. Grady Harper sat at a rusted metal table in the back of La Tienda de Miguel, a roadside cantina in the barrio Antioquia. He was sweating through his shirt, a sensation he had lived with for 6 months. Grady was DEA, but here, that acronym didn't mean authority. It meant target. He looked like a tourist who had taken a wrong turn. Faded jeans, a loose Guayabera shirt, and a week's worth of stubble. But under the table, his hand rested near his ankle where a .38 snub nose was taped. He was waiting for a ghost. His contact was a man named Mateo, a low-level sicario, hitman, who had grown a conscience, or more likely, a fear of dying young. Mateo claimed to have information on El Relojero, the Watchmaker. The Watchmaker wasn't just a killer. He was a myth. The cartel used him when they didn't just want someone dead. They wanted to send a message about precision. No collateral damage. No messy sprays of Uzi fire. Just one impossible shot, or a car bomb that detonated the exact second the target turned the ignition key. Clink. A bottle of aguardiente was placed on the table. Grady didn't look up. He poured a shot of the clear, anise-flavored firewater. It tasted like licorice and gasoline. "You look like a man waiting for a storm, gringo," the bartender muttered, wiping a glass with a rag that was grayer than the sky. "Just waiting for a friend," Grady replied in passable Spanish, his accent thick but functional. "Friends are expensive in this barrio," the bartender said, and walked away. 10 minutes later, Mateo arrived. He was young, barely 20, wearing a counterfeit Adidas tracksuit and a gold chain that looked heavy on his skinny neck. He didn't sit. He stood by the open doorway, his eyes darting between the street and Grady. "Sit down, kid," Grady said, keeping his voice low. "You're drawing attention." Mateo slid into the chair, his leg bouncing nervously. "He knows, Harper. I swear to the Virgin, he knows." "Who knows? Escobar?" "No," Mateo hissed, leaning in. The kid smelled of cheap cologne and cold sweat. "The Watchmaker. He was in the Comuna last night. I saw his mark." Grady leaned forward. "What mark?" Mateo reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. He slammed it onto the metal table, covering it with his hand. Slowly, he lifted his fingers. It was a small, golden cogwheel, a tiny, delicate gear from a high-end Swiss watch. "They found Flaco dead in his apartment," Mateo whispered. "No blood on the walls, just a small hole in his forehead, right between the eyes, and this was placed on his tongue." Grady stared at the gear. It was the Watchmaker's signature. "It meant your time has run out." "Why did he kill Flaco?" Grady asked. "Because Flaco was the driver for the shipment next Tuesday, the one going to Miami. The Watchmaker is clearing the board, Harper. He is preparing for something big, a hit on someone high up." "Who is the target, Mateo?" The kid swallowed hard. He looked at the street again. A motorcycle engine revved in the distance, a sound that usually made everyone in Medellin freeze. But it faded away. "I don't have a name," Mateo said, "but I have a location. Tomorrow at noon, the Plaza Botero. He is going to meet with the patron's lieutenant to get the final order. Plaza Botero. Grady shook his head. That's the center of the city. Too open. Too many eyes. That is why he likes it, Mateo said, his voice trembling. He hides in plain sight. He is not a shadow, Harper. He is the man standing next to you buying cigarettes. He is the old man feeding pigeons. Suddenly, the phone on the wall of the cantina rang. It was a harsh, jarring sound in the humid afternoon. The bartender answered it. He listened for a second, his face going pale. He didn't say a word. He just hung up the receiver and looked directly at Grady. "It is for you, senor." Grady felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Nobody knew he was here. Not the embassy. Not even his handler. Only Mateo. He stood up and walked to the phone. He picked up the receiver, the plastic slick with humidity. "Harper," he said. "Tick-Tock, Agent Harper," a voice said on the other end. It was calm, cultured, with a faint European accent that didn't belong in these mountains. "You are looking at the wrong gears. If you want to understand the machine, you must step away from the table." "Who is this?" Grady demanded, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun. "Step away from the table, Mr. Harper, right now." Grady didn't ask again. He dropped the phone and dove to the floor, shouting, "Mateo, down!" But Mateo didn't move fast enough. He was staring at the small golden gear on the table, mesmerized by the way it caught the light. From the hill overlooking the cantina, a single shot rang out. It wasn't the rattle of an automatic. It was the dry, singular crack of a high-velocity rifle. The glass bottle of aguardiente on the table exploded. Mateo fell backward, his chair clattering against the concrete. Grady scrambled behind the heavy wooden bar, his ears ringing. He looked at Mateo. The kid was alive, but terrified, staring at the hole in the wall just inches from where his head had been. The shot hadn't been meant to kill. It was a warning shot. The phone was swinging by its cord, hitting the wall with a dull thud. Grady looked at the receiver. The voice on the other end was gone, but the message was clear. The watchmaker wasn't just hunting a target. He was hunting the hunter, and the game had just begun. Drive 20 miles out of Medellin, and the city dissolves into a vertical wall of rainforest. The locals call it La Selva, the jungle. But for men like Grady Harper, it was just the green. A place where radio signals die, compasses spin, and every vine looks like a tripwire. Grady drove the battered beige Toyota Land Cruiser up a dirt track that was more mud than road. The vehicle groaned as it climbed the steep ridge of the Cordillera Central. Beside him, Mateo was clutching the dashboard, his knuckles white. The kid was a creature of the barrio. Out here, surrounded by the deafening silence of the trees, he looked like a child lost in a nightmare. "Where is this finca, Mateo?" Grady shouted over the roar of the engine. "Past the curve, Finca La Niebla," Mateo yelled back. Flaco said he delivered the packages there. He said the gringo, the watchmaker, he uses it as a workshop. They crested the hill. Below them lay a small valley, shrouded in the mist that gave the farm its name, the Mist. An old colonial coffee plantation house sat in the center, its white walls stained with moss. The roof tiles cracked. It looked abandoned, but Grady knew better. In this war, nothing was abandoned. It was just waiting. He killed the engine 200 yards out. Silence rushed back in, heavy and wet. The jungle was screaming with life. Cicadas, howler monkeys, birds. But underneath it all was a tension that made the hair on Grady's arms stand up. "We walk from here," Grady said, grabbing his M16 from the back seat. Stay behind me. Step where I step. If you see a wire, a disturbed patch of dirt, or anything shiny, you freeze." They moved into the tree line. The heat was suffocating. It wasn't the dry burn of a desert. It was a wet, heavy blanket that coated the lungs. Mud sucked at their boots. As they approached the main house, Grady noticed the details. The coffee bushes were overgrown, but the path to the front door was clear. Too clear. No weeds. Someone was maintaining access. He signaled Mateo to stop. Grady low-crawled to the edge of the porch. He peered through a window. Inside, it wasn't a drug lab. There were no barrels of acetone, no coca leaves drying on plastic sheets. It looked like an engineer's drafting room. Large topographical maps of Medellin were pinned to the walls. On a heavy oak table in the center sat a high-powered radio setup and tools, precision tools, calipers, scopes, disassembled trigger mechanisms, and clocks. Half a dozen clocks on the wall, all set to different time zones: Bogota, Miami, New York, Zurich. "He's not a sicario," Grady whispered to himself. "He's a technician." He tried the door. Unlocked. They stepped inside. The air was cooler here, smelling of old wood and gun oil. Grady moved to the table. He saw a map of Plaza Botero, the location Mateo had mentioned earlier. There were red lines drawn across the plaza, calculating sight lines and windage. "Look," Mateo whispered, pointing to the corner. There, on a workbench, sat a sniper rifle. But it wasn't a standard-issue Dragunov or Remington. It was a custom job, painted in matte jungle camouflage, with a barrel that looked long enough to shoot the moon. Next to the rifle was a note, handwritten, in elegant cursive. Grady picked it up. "To Agent Harper, you are early. The appointment was for tomorrow. But since you are here, let us see if you can keep time." Click. The sound came from beneath the floorboards. A heavy mechanical latch releasing. "Run!" Grady screamed, grabbing Mateo by the collar. They burst out the front door just as the first explosion tore through the back of the house. It wasn't a massive fireball. It was a directional charge, designed to collapse the structure inwards. They scrambled down the muddy slope, diving behind the thick roots of a massive ceiba tree. Debris rained down around them, shards of roof tile, splinters of oak, and papers fluttering like dying moths. Grady checked his limbs. Still attached. He looked at Mateo. The kid was curled in a ball, sobbing. "Get up," Grady hissed. "He knew we were coming. He lured us here to flush us out." Then came the sound. Thwip. A leaf next to Grady's ear disintegrated. No gunshot sound, just the impact. "Suppressor!" Grady yelled, dragging Mateo deeper into the foliage. "He's in the trees! Move!" They ran blindly into the jungle. The emerald fever took over, the panic of being hunted in a world where everything is green and hostile. Thwip! Dirt kicked up inches from Mateo's heel. The Watchmaker was hurting them. He wasn't trying to kill them instantly. He was driving them somewhere. The shots were precise, calculated to miss by inches. He was playing with them. Grady slid down a muddy embankment, crashing into a stream. The water was brown and fast. He pulled Mateo down beside him, pressing their backs against the muddy bank. "Listen to me," Grady panted, water dripping from his nose. "He's up high, probably on the ridge. He's using a subsonic round. We won't hear the shot until it hits us." "We are dead," Mateo wailed. "He is the devil. He sees through the leaves." "He's not the devil. He's a man with a scope," Grady snapped, checking his magazine. "And he's making a mistake." "What mistake?" "He's driving us down," Grady said, looking at the rushing water. "He wants us in the valley floor. It's a kill box, open ground." Grady looked up at the canopy. The sun was setting, casting long, distorted shadows through the vines. The jungle was turning from emerald to black. "We don't go down," Grady said, a cold resolve settling in his eyes. "We go up. We hunt the hunter." He looked at his watch. 5:48 p.m., 12 minutes until total darkness. "Can you climb, Mateo?" The kid looked at the sheer wall of mud and roots behind them. Then he looked at the water where a bullet had just hissed into the stream. "I can fly if I have to, Patron," Mateo whispered. "Good, because tonight we're going to wind his clock. 1 minute you can see your hand in front of your face, and the next you are blind, submerged in a sea of ink." The temperature didn't drop, but the air changed. It became heavier, smelling of rotting vegetation and wet earth. The green hell had turned black, and the sounds of the day, the birds and monkeys, were replaced by the rhythmic, deafening chirping of insects that sounded like millions of tiny gears grinding together. Grady Harper and Mateo were no longer running. They were clawing their way up the ridge. The mud was slick as grease. Every step was a battle against gravity. Grady moved first, digging his boots into the exposed roots, pulling himself up by grabbing handfuls of ferns that cut his palms like paper. "Don't look down," Grady whispered, though in this darkness, looking down meant staring into a void. "And for God's sake, keep your mouth shut." Mateo was hyperventilating behind him. The kid was sobbing quietly, a sound that was swallowed by the jungle noise. He had lost a shoe in the river, and his sock was already shredded. But fear was a powerful anesthetic. They were climbing the blind side of the ridge, aiming to flank the position where the shots had come from. It was a gamble. If the Watchmaker had thermal optics, they were already dead. If he had moved, they were climbing into nothing. An hour passed, then 2. Their clothes were plastered to their skin. The rain started, a sudden, violent tropical downpour that hammered against the canopy above, masking the sound of their movement but turning the slope into a mudslide. Grady stopped. He held up a fist. They were near the crest. Through the gaps in the trees, faint moonlight filtered through the storm clouds. Grady could see the outline of a rocky outcrop about 50 yards away. It was the perfect vantage point. It overlooked the valley, the river, and the ruins of the farmhouse below. Grady unslung his M16. He checked the action. The mud hadn't jammed it yet. He signaled Mateo to stay low behind a massive mahogany trunk. "Stay," Grady mouthed. He moved forward, belly crawling through the slush. He wasn't an agent anymore. He was a predator returning to the swamp. He approached the rocks from the rear, his finger tightening on the trigger. He reached the edge of the outcrop. He took a breath, held it, and surged up, weapon raised, ready to fire. Empty. The rock shelf was bare, but he hadn't imagined the shots. He moved closer, scanning the stone. There, pressed into the mud between 2 rocks, was the imprint of a bipod. And next to it, glinting faintly in the moonlight, was not a shell casing, but a cigarette butt. Grady picked it up. It was still warm. Crack. The sound didn't come from the valley. It came from behind him, from the tree line where he had left Mateo. "No!" Grady screamed, spinning around. He saw a flash of movement, a shadow detaching itself from the darkness of the trees. It wasn't a man hiding. It was a man who had been waiting. The Watchmaker hadn't stayed on the ridge. He had anticipated the flank. He knew a trained agent wouldn't stay in the kill box. He had waited for Grady to come to him. Grady fired a burst into the shadows. Bang, bang, bang! The muzzle flashes illuminated the jungle for a split second like a strobe light. He saw a figure dressed in black, wearing night vision goggles that looked like the eyes of a giant insect. The figure moved with unnatural fluidity, sliding down a vine-covered slope on the other side of the ridge. Grady didn't pursue. He ran back to the mahogany tree. Mateo was sitting on the ground, clutching his shoulder. Blood was seeping through his fingers, dark and thick. I didn't see him," Mateo gasped, his face gray. He was right beside me," he whispered. Grady knelt, applying pressure to the wound. It was a through-and-through shot, painful, but missed the artery. The watchmaker had aimed carefully. Again. "What did he whisper, Mateo?" Grady demanded, ripping a strip from his own shirt to bind the wound. Mateo looked up, his eyes wide with a terror that went beyond physical pain. He said, "The clock is fast. Tell Harper that Plaza Botero is a distraction. The gears turn at the Cathedral." Grady froze. The Cathedral. La Catedral wasn't a church. It was the private prison that Pablo Escobar had built for himself in the mountains. A fortress disguised as a jail. If the watchmaker was talking about La Catedral, then the target wasn't some mid-level snitch or politician. The target was inside the most secure location in Colombia. Grady looked at his watch. The luminous hands glowed in the dark. 11:45 p.m. "Can you walk?" Grady asked, hauling Mateo to his feet. "I don't think I have a choice, Patron." "You're right, you don't," Grady said, staring into the black abyss of the jungle where the killer had vanished. "Because if he's right, we're not hunting a hitman anymore. We're trying to stop a coup." They began the descent. The rain washed the blood from Mateo's arm, but it couldn't wash away the feeling that they were just small cogs in a machine much larger and much deadlier than they had imagined. In the mountains of Medellin, when people speak of La Catedral, they don't mean a place of prayer. They mean the gold-plated prison built by the king of cocaine. It was a palace on a hill, guarded by the army, but ruled by the man inside. On this night, the mist was so thick it swallowed the guard towers, leaving only the yellow glow of the perimeter lights. Grady Harper pushed the Land Cruiser to its absolute limit. The engine screamed as they tore up the final switchback toward the facility. Behind him, Mateo was semi-conscious, pale from blood loss. "Stay in the car, Mateo," Grady ordered, skidding to a halt behind a dense thicket of fern near the main delivery entrance. "If I'm not back in 10 minutes, drive down the mountain and don't stop until you see the American flag at the embassy." Grady didn't head for the front gates. He knew how the watchmaker worked. He wouldn't be outside. He'd be where the machinery was. He bypassed the outer fence through a drainage tunnel he'd mapped weeks ago. Emerging inside the perimeter, he heard it. The low, rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the massive industrial generators that powered the prison's communications and security grids. Inside the generator room, the air was vibrating with power and the smell of diesel. And there, standing atop the main fuel tank, was the man in black, the watchmaker. He wasn't looking through a scope now. He was adjusting a device wired into the primary fuel line. It looked like a masterpiece of engineering. Brass gears, copper wires, and a digital timer glowing red. "O2, Grady whispered, aiming his M16. "Hands up now." The watchmaker didn't flinch. He slowly turned around. Without the night vision goggles, he looked surprisingly ordinary. A man in his late 40s, with silver hair and the calm eyes of a university professor. "You are exactly on time, Agent Harper," the watchmaker said, his voice smooth despite the roar of the engines. "Aero 158 remaining. Precision is the soul of destiny." "Step away from the bomb, Relojero," Grady growled, his finger on the trigger. "It's not a bomb in the traditional sense, Grady. It's a detonator for the entire fuel reserve of La Catedral. When this goes, the mountain will erupt. The king inside will be buried in his own gold. The CIA wanted him gone without a trial. I am simply the tool they hired. Grady felt the world shift. The watchmaker was working for the good guys, or at least the ones who signed Grady's paychecks. If the prison exploded, hundreds of guards and inmates would die just to kill one man. I can't let you do that, Grady said. There are people in there who haven't been charged, civilians. Collateral damage is just a rounding error in history, the watchmaker replied, reaching for a small remote on his belt. Grady didn't hesitate. He squeezed the trigger. Rat-tat-tat! The bullet sparked off the metal casing of the generator. The watchmaker dove sideways, moving with the speed of a man half his age. He pulled a suppressed pistol from his hip and returned fire. Grady took cover behind a stack of oil drums. The room became a chaotic symphony of ricochets and hissing steam. "Oh, 1:15?" The timer beeped. Grady knew he couldn't win a shootout. He looked at the main control panel for the fire suppression system. A massive tank of halon gas sat in the corner. He fired a full magazine into the halon tank's valve. The tank hissed, releasing a deafening cloud of white gas that sucked the oxygen out of the room. Both men began to choke. The watchmaker stumbled, his vision blurred by the freezing mist. Grady lunged forward, tackling the killer. They crashed into the concrete floor. The watchmaker was strong, his hands like iron, reaching for Grady's throat. Grady slammed his forehead into the killer's nose, feeling the cartilage break. With a desperate heave, Grady threw the watchmaker toward the open delivery bay. The killer tumbled out into the darkness of the ravine below. 0:15. Grady scrambled up the fuel tank. The device was humming. He didn't have time to defuse the complex clockwork. He grabbed the entire unit, wires and all, and ripped it from the fuel line. He ran to the delivery bay and hurled the device as far as he could into the misty abyss. 5 seconds. 4, 3. A blinding white flash illuminated the jungle. Boom! The shockwave knocked Grady off his feet. A massive pillar of fire erupted from the ravine, lighting up the sky like a second sun. The prison shook. Alarms began to blare, but the fuel lines held. The cathedral was still standing. By the time the Colombian army reached the generator room, Agent Grady Harper was gone. He'd vanished back into the green, taking a wounded kid named Mateo with him. The official report said it was a terrorist attempt that failed due to a faulty detonator. But the CIA knew better. They knew Grady had chosen humanity over a rounding error. Grady didn't go back to the embassy. He took Mateo across the border to Panama, using some of the emergency funds he'd liberated from a cartel safe house. He bought a small boat and a new name, the Watchmaker. His body was never found in the ravine. Some say he's still out there, fixing the world's problems one gear at a time. But in the jungles of Colombia, the emerald fever finally broke. Grady Harper finally found the one thing no clock can measure: peace.